Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to a very special episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this episode on all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky. Do remember to click subscribe to the Five Pillars YouTube channel. This is a bit of a fanboy moment for me, because the academic that we have on the show today is someone whose works I have followed for some time, and he has jumped back into virality. There was a recent clip of his where he spoke about Bangladesh considering a nuclear deterrence pact with Pakistan. That clip received tens of millions of views on X and beyond. He was the former chairman of the Department of International Relations at Dhaka University, and that's none other than Professor Shahiduz Zaman. Assalamu alaikum. How are you, Professor?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. Pleasure is all mine. There is so much for us to discuss, such a wide time period to cover. So I apologize in advance for forcing you to do it within the time frame that we have. Would it be fair to start the conversation of Bangladesh's future with its past? And would that past be fair to talk at 1947?
Yeah, for a while.
For a while. So,
Just a minute.
Tell us a bit about the deal that was struck when East Pakistan was formed and the role of Bengal specifically.
Exactly. It's very relevant and necessary to talk of 1947 or the partition, as we call it, because unless we discuss the mishaps that took place during the partition of India in 1947, we won't be able to recognize the compulsions that we face for the future, that we correct the wrongs done to us as Bengalis, Muslim Bengalis in this part of the subcontinent. When the partition took place, we were really imposed by realities where we had really, the Bengali Muslims had no control. Since the whole idea of creating a separate state was initiated by Hossein Sheikh Sarwardi, the Prime Minister of Bengal, in 1946, when he broached the idea of the entire Bengal and Assam grouped together to create a new state. Sarwardi, as the Prime Minister, was absolutely vocal, and he was a learned man. He went to Mountbatten, and Mountbatten mentions in his last interviews before he was assassinated that when Sarwardi proposed to him about creating an independent state of Bengal and Assam, it made a lot of sense to Mountbatten. And Mountbatten thought that here was a man who had a lot of optimism in him, who could see a viable economic future for Bengal and Assam, and about which even Jinnah had his approval. Unfortunately, it was Nehru and Gandhi who prevailed on the Bengali Hindus. When it came up for referendum in the Bengal Assembly, the Bengali Hindus voted against it, and Sarwardi was totally taken aback. It was something like as if he was stabbed on the back. And even today, I'm puzzled. Why hadn't Sarwardi, read the Hindu psyche, the Bengali Hindu psyche, adequately enough before he was, so swayed by this idea? The damage that was done was that when Radcliffe created the Bengal Partition Commission to determine the boundaries of Bengal and the rest of the India, Sarwardi was not there. He was not available. He was not even invited to be the Muslim League Council. And that was exactly what Hamidul Haq Chaudhry, who represented the Bengali boundary Muslim League in the commission, Hamidul Haq Chaudhry repented later on that it wasn't possible for him to argue for the entire Assam, which deservingly should have been a part of Pakistan. The reason he failed was that the IAS officers and the impact of the Radcliffe was so overwhelmingly in favor of the Congress that Hamidul Haq Chaudhry repented that had Sarwardi been there, we would have not lost Assam. So that was the reality. We really got what Jinnah had called a moth-eaten Pakistan. We lost the entire Assam, we lost the northern part of what we have today as Indian territory of Jalpaiguri, Darjeeling, the part that borders the northeast in Nepal and also within China. We lost that territory, and we also lost the entire Murshidabad and the adjoining district of Nodia, which had a lot of Muslim heritage. Anyway, that is where I just mentioned the partition. So we really turned into a state which was one of the worst examples of deprivation in terms of boundaries. If you look at so many states across the world, even if you look at the Central Asian states, all these Kazakhstans, Pakistan and all this stuff, all of them have huge territory. They're underpopulated, and the entire population really got the territory in a platter. There are so many examples even in Southeast Asia. Other Southeast Asian countries have an optimum level of territory. Look at Myanmar, for example, with a population of hardly 4.5 crores, 40 million. They have a huge territory which is so rich in resources. Half of that territory should have been ours if there was no concept of statehood based on this nation-state boundary system that became universal after 1945, after the end of the Second World War. Then Bengalis and Bengali Muslims should have spread all across the eastern part of Southeast, these adjoining lands. In the language of geography, a former geography colleague of mine called this the pioneer lands of Bengal, meaning in geographical terms, just like water spilling over. The Bengali Muslim population would have spilled into this entire Myanmar region, Assam, the Seven Sisters, and also Arakan. And that way, we would have had an optimum number of people living in the optimum size of a territory. But instead, we were squeezed mercilessly by the Congress as well as Mountbatten and the Radcliffe Commission. Jinnah was absolutely nervous. He didn't know what to do. He only was hoping that he would get a piece of land that would be a part of Pakistan, in the eastern part of Pakistan. When Sher Bangla tried his best to include Arakan, he had no option but shrug away. And the entire northeast was grabbed by the Indians.
So who's to blame for that? I mean, because some would be watching this right now and think, well, hold on, Nehru isn't to blame, Jinnah's to blame for accepting the deal eventually, the crumbs that were given.
Actually, Jinnah had no option. He knew that he didn't have much time to live. He was ill. Secondly, he knew the overwhelming influence of Congress, especially Nehru, over Mountbatten. He knew that Radcliffe was biased towards the Indians, and Mountbatten, as Jinnah knew very well, always wanted to avoid partition. In fact, Jinnah was at one time the believer in Hindu-Muslim unity, but it was a rude shock for him when Gandhi played his pranks, and really, it's injected in Jinnah's mind the idea that Hindus and Muslims were indeed two separate nations. So I honestly believe that when we emerged in 1947, unfortunately, we were denied the living space, as the Germans call Lebensraum. And I would always believe, in retrospect, that one day we would again regain that lost land. In 1947, what we were deprived of would eventually be corrected. So now, as we have gone through this huge length of time, gone through the period of experience of the Pakistani experience, being forced to live as a state separated by a huge hostile Indian territory, it is quite possible that as we reflect on about 50 years of separate existence as Bangladesh, one thing that has emerged strongly in my psyche due to the experience of the last 10 years of Hasina rule, that it is absolutely essential that we retain our umbilical cord, as we call it, umbilical cord with Pakistan, the western wing Pakistan, that whatever we believe that we were not feasible to be a state because of the geographical separation, there is another part to it, that given the nature of Indian threat, given the nature of Indian belief in Akhand Bharat, and given the fact that the RSS, which is actually a terrorist organization, continues to dominate the foreign policy of the BJP, it is inevitable that if we want to survive as a self-respecting nation, our defense links with Pakistan is absolutely essential. Without a defense and security cooperation of Pakistan, we are absolutely going to be gobbled up into a vassal state under India. In fact, if the students hadn't revolted and if the Hasina government hadn't been overthrown, most likely that by the end of this year, an Indian division would have been permanently entrenched in Bangladesh with the complete consent of the Awami League government, and that Indian division staying permanently in Bangladesh would have ensured that Bangladesh should never ever acquire the capability to emerge as a truly independent state. So I think it was divine blessing of Almighty Allah that the student revolution took place right in time, so that, suddenly we woke up from slumber and realized that, oh my God, the Indians had plans which we never could have comprehended. And the Indian plan was more substantiated, on the one hand, by the reaction, by the maddening reaction of the Indian media, claiming that there was a genocide of Hindus going on in Bangladesh, which really took us aback. For 2 months they used this sort of a propaganda, absolutely planned and absolutely, motivated to physically intervene. And on the other hand, suddenly we found out that the minority population in Bangladesh, the Hindus, had suddenly started mobilizing themselves to restore the Awami League government, to appeal to the Indian government to come and help them from what they considered the sort of eradication. And in fact, in the last 2 days, we have seen how the Hindus had even gone up to approach former President Trump.
Yep.
To create a false appeal.
With his recent tweet.
Where
he said Bangladesh is in a state of chaos, Hindus, Christians and everyone are being attacked.
It simply indicates how the India had planned a long-term conspiracy to enslave us. But thank God that over the last 50 years, whatever we had certain misgivings against being a part of Pakistan, the economic problems, but the fact is that while we were a part of Pakistan, we never felt threatened to be gobbled up by the Indians.
But the counter would be, fine, we weren't gobbled by India, but you were certainly seen as a lesser wing of Pakistan.
Yes, of course.
And you cannot deny the events that, Operation Searchlight. And
absolutely.
You can't deny these things.
Absolutely.
So is there anything that you think, look, what's happened is happened. You can't rewrite history. But hypothetically speaking, are there things which could have prevented 71?
Yes, even Pakistan had the West Pakistani elite. It was largely a feudal class, and the feudal culture still continues. This feudal culture, they dominate the armed forces, and the Pakistani military establishment, unfortunately, was taken over by instincts of some sort of a superiority, some sort of a distrust towards Bengalis. But more than anything else, I guess it was the overwhelming evil influence of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was too ambitious, who had in fact sort of sabotaged Ayub Khan's rise in power, and who eventually flirted with the Pakistan army and compelled the type of military action that really broke up Pakistan. Had Mujib been accepted as the Prime Minister of Pakistan, perhaps that reality, that sad eventual separation may not have happened at that time, may not have happened. Anyway, the whole reality that we look back on has too much of tragic, retrospection, and the narrative has so much of, sufferings for Bengalis. It's better now that we tend to put it back, because we are now confronted by a far more serious challenge. And unless we are able to put 71 behind the curtains, we won't be able to confront the question of our survival as a free state in the near future, which is that suddenly over the last 10 years, this realization has dawned in me, as well as many other academics in Bangladesh and policy planners, that it's time, after all, to revive our links with Pakistan, to come to this recognition that these two formerly parts of the same country need each other desperately in order to survive as Muslims, as subcontinental Muslims, and in order to reclaim our right over the fate of Muslims in India. Over the years, the rise of fanatic radicalism in India and the rise of RSS, a terrorist organization, which has hardly been exposed the way it deserved to be.
Absolutely.
Have put the fate of Muslims into a very bitter reality. Not only that, the history of the Muslims in the subcontinent is being rewritten, revised, and absolutely, fabricated. The names of prominent places in India, even the name of of this famous location, Mughal Sarai, had been changed. The name of Allahabad, one of the most prominent North Indian cities, after the name of the Almighty God, has been changed by a Hindu name. And there are so many other places which had been subject to change. That is where we Muslims in Bengal and in Pakistan require to be alert. You see, our history has been so much, distorted by the Army League over the last 15 years. And also when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman took over as the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. We cannot trace back our identity with the Hindu identity of Bengal that goes back to several thousand years. It might appear very romantic to say that Bengali Muslims have a several thousand-year-old culture, but that's not our culture. If we say, like the Army League did, that you create a historical narrative identifying the Bengali Muslim with the 3,000-year-old Bengali origin, going back to Gopal, Shashank, that way we end up unconsciously contributing to the idea of Akhand Bharat.
Absolutely.
Which is crazy. We had always believed that we are the descendants of Ikhtiaruddin Muhammad Bakhtiyar Khilji, who conquered Bengal at a time which led to the revival of Islam in this part, the birth of the Bengal Sultanate.
Yep.
The glorious chapter of 500 years of the Bengal Sultanate, which extended all the way across northern India.
Yep.
And had such great rulers who had, in fact, if I could talk about Shamsuddin Ilyas Shah, he was the father of the Bengali nationhood. He was the one who translated even the Ramayana into Bengali. He translated Hindu scriptures into Bengali. And he worked so hard to bring about the amalgamation of Hindus and Muslims in the Bengal Sultanate. The Hindus never recognized. If you turn to the Indian television, if you look at the TV channels in West Bengal, in Calcutta, there is no mention of the glorious past of Muslims who fought and gained blood for the freedom of India against the British rule. Just like the way they treat the history of Tipu Sultan with such distortion and portray him, this BJP government, the man who gave his life fighting in the battlefield for Indian freedom, for the freedom of Mysore.
Yep.
He has been painted as a communal person. This is the story of Indians. In the history of Bengal that you hear from the Hindus, there is no mention of Titumi, no mention of Shariatullah, no mention of Haji Muhammad Mohsin, no mention of the thousands of Muslims who laid their life in the 1857 War of Independence.
Yes.
It was in fact the Bengal Light Cavalry that originated in Bengal that went all the way to Delhi and liberated Bahadur Shah Zafar and restored him on the throne. See, all the martial history of the Bengali Muslims have been distorted by the Hindus and the British just because of 1857. Bengalis were in fact a martial race. They had fought for the Sultanate of Bengal for 500 years. They fought even in the British Indian Army. But eventually the British deliberately tainted the Bengali Muslims as non-martial, and they turned towards the Gurkhas and the Punjabis instead. They were massively recruited in the British Army, and they were the ones who were instead.
And that's affected our psyche, I think. I think that, this kind of sidelining, this rewriting, this exclusion of Bengali Muslims in the rich history, the Islamic history, and the general history of the Indian subcontinent, it's had an effect on our psyche, because we are not told that we are a martial ethnicity or martial race, and that naturally has an effect on the way we see ourselves in our future.
Exactly.
Emasculation is one aspect in terms of the psychiness. So let me ask you then, Professor, how do we then make sense of India's intervention in 71? Do we see it as altruistic and humanitarian and brotherly, or is there another agenda?
Absolutely not altruistic and no way humanitarian. The whole scheme that the Indians had was based on a letter by K. Subramanian, who was the director of the Indian Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis, and whose son is the current Foreign Minister of India, Jaishankar. It was Subramanian who wrote this thesis to persuade Mrs. Gandhi to intervene, and he projected that this was a chance of a lifetime to break up Pakistan, to break up the problem of Muslim domination in this subcontinent. And he argued that by breaking up Pakistan, we will remove the threat from the eastern part of India, and they would be able to focus their military exclusively on China and on Pakistan on the west. In other words, the whole idea was that the threat from the east, from East Pakistan, will be permanently removed. So that really happened. The breakup of Pakistan at India's own in 1971 is also epitomized by what Mrs. Gandhi had said, that they had overcome over 1,000 years of Muslim rule in the subcontinent. So their designs were totally secretive. They had looked at the breakup of Pakistan in terms of breaking up the backbone of Muslim rule in the subcontinent. However, since you have put the challenge on me to encapsulate the whole discussion within an hour,
I'm sorry.
I'd like to take the opportunity to shift to the more really, current part that would explain the rationale for how we should proceed towards the future. Now, having mentioned it, I think the initiative to say that, as I had argued right at the beginning, that in geopolitical terms, we were the ones, our country was the worst case of territorial deprivation, that we fit in with the geopolitical doctrine of Rudolf Zelling in 1918, when he said that, in fact, the state is like a living organism. Either it expands or it shrinks into oblivion. If we hadn't come out of this tragic reality in the last, few months of being, gobbled up by the Indian encroachments, our statehood would have started a process of shrinking. But that has been arrested by the students' revolution, and now we have suddenly waken up to the possibility of state reconstruction. As we say that there has to be some engineering to be done to the statehood of Bangladesh. To me, such an engineering, while it involves so much of the domestic realities, the hard reality relating to external security is an area which is hardly touched by anybody in this country.
Charity is just a band-aid solution. In 2024, charity alone isn't enough. In 2024, is donating enough? Because giving charity to the oppressed only treats their symptoms. It's like putting a plaster over a deep wound. It's important and needed, but it doesn't fix the problem. But speaking up against the oppressors can cure the disease. Help and support organizations like Human Aid and Advocacy that do both. Humanitarian aid is crucial, but fighting for justice brings real change. As Muslims, it's our duty to stand up for the truth. Do your part by supporting Human Aid and Advocacy. Let me just touch upon that, because I attended the event at TSC. Yourself, Mahmoudur Rahman spoke, and every time Mahmoudur Rahman referred to your speech, he kept referring to your speech as long-term, right? Whereas his short-term solution was military conscription for 3 months and other suggestions. What small steps can we take to make your long-term plan realistic? Meaning there has to be political will from both sides, surely. I mean, Bangladesh can say we want a nuclear deterrence pact with our former brother on brotherly terms, but there has to be willpower from their side.
Exactly.
And one of the counters would be, are you not then pushing Bangladesh into the sphere of the US and US hegemony? Because ultimately Pakistan's military establishment has been described as a client state, as a garrison state for the United States of America.
I'm so glad that you picked up this very sensitive point and you noticed the expression by Dr. Mahmoudur Rahman.
I did.
What I would like to say is that I slightly disagree with Dr. Mahmoudur Rahman. This is not a long-term design that I talked about. This is a design which has to be implemented immediately. I call it a short, just a currently viable, essential design for the future. Because all the homework is already done to develop a link with Pakistan, to develop a nuclear deterrent that we can share. Let me explain how. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine had evolved after its nuclear explosion, where it retained what we call the NATO doctrine of the right of first use.
Yep.
Which means that even if there was a conventional attack by the Soviet Union on Europe, the NATO would make a nuclear response. The right of first use sounds unethical, sounds jingoistic, but then Pakistan had survived because it had maintained. Over the last 40 years or so, Indians have made several moves to liberate, what they call liberate, or to capture Azad Kashmir. Indians would have thought of bifurcating Pakistan and separating Punjab from Sindh had Pakistan not have the nuclear deterrent. It was the nuclear deterrent which had saved them from being broken up further. Now, this right of first use that Pakistan applies on itself has sense for us, because why we had believed that India would respect our sovereignty, that India would not encroach on our freedom of our foreign policy. What we had seen during the Hasina regime is that the Indians took liberty of Hasina's inclination to remain in power indefinitely, and thereby, it was something like handing over our sovereignty in a platter to the BJP government. She had tried it earlier during the Congress period too, but no one could have imagined that this Awami League government really had the intention of developing some sort of a vassal status of relationship with India. And the whole concept of, secularism, which I have to admit is absolutely fatal. The very concept of secularism ended when Sarwadi failed to create Bengal and Assam together. After that, when we became a part of Pakistan, we were given the bare minimum territory with the Muslim population squeezed in it. so that there would not be any further balkanization of the territory we received. Unfortunately, during this Hasina period, the Hindu population has been encouraged, flattered, and made to believe on this peculiar idea that they had no role, their forefathers had no role to play in this enforcement of our present boundaries, which denied us the lands that we should have had. We lost Murshidabad and Malda, even the northern part, all of it was snatched largely because of these Hindus. Now, what has happened is that Hasina's government has created a situation for India to constantly encroach and ask for passage to Assam, as if we have become a means for them to preserve Assam. But Jaishankar had even remarked 3 months back to a German journalist that the very creation of Bangladesh was a threat to the security of the Northeast, implying that Bangladesh would rather be better off not existing, being a part of India. This had really shattered my mind. It created, more than anybody else that I know of, it created a rude awakening in me. And I took that remark very seriously, and I mentioned that quotation several times on Bangladeshi television and on international TV. I had expected that Jaishankar or any Indian spokesman should deny that statement and say that this was only meant for the Western journal, but there was no denial. It meant that Indians actually believed that the very creation of Bangladesh was not suited to their interest. That in 1971 they should have rather annexed Bangladesh.
As opposed to granting it independence.
Exactly.
Wow.
Their writers now argue that it was a great mistake to withdraw the Indian army from Bangladesh. That
the truth eventually came out.
Yeah, we didn't. And in fact, if they had stayed, if this revolution wouldn't have taken place, they would have again re-entered Bangladesh with some pretext to protect the passages that they have created. So, the very idea, I'm coming to the most important part of my presentation to you, is that why is it that a nuclear cooperation with Pakistan makes perfect sense?
Is it realistic though?
Realistic. Yes, I think it is realistic. In the first case, Pakistan has always felt a sense of guilt in terms of their, to reinforce Bangladesh militarily, to protect our independence, to always offer a helping hand in whatever way they can so that we don't become a vassal of India. It has really hurt the Pakistanis to have lost their arm. It was something like a surgical operation on them, and they had never rested in peace, knowing the fact that this part of what was Pakistan once could eventually be vassalized by India. So I am aware of it. Now, the first answer is that for Pakistan, they have excess of nuclear warheads, they have excess of nuclear missiles, and had we not broken up from them, if we were East Pakistan,
They would have been here.
they would have been here. These nuclear missiles would have in any case be here.
Yes.
This is the first point, that if we choose to invite Pakistan, in that case it is a matter between the two of us because of what we think. Secondly, we've always had defense cooperation with Pakistan. Even Hasina could not help but buy arms, small arms from Pakistan, lots of ammunition.
Or small munitions and stuff like this.
That really, satisfies the rationale that Bangladesh and Pakistan could go a one step deeper to the ultimate option of nuclear cooperation. Now, the idea of nuclear cooperation is not something new. Why? India has nuclear cooperation with Israel. We don't know the secret aspects, but we know very well that India and Israel has very close defense cooperation. That would involve exchange of nuclear weapons technology. Now, Pakistan and China also have nuclear weapons cooperation. Nuclear technology is extended to Pakistan. So by default, by the same sequence, Bangladesh, which has been critically threatened by India over the last several years, has every right for self-defense. It's a matter of self-respect that we seek Pakistan for several reasons. The first reason is Pakistan is committed, seriously committed, to help us preserve our Sikh sovereignty. We cannot ever expect that Pakistan would sign a secret deal with India at our cost. That is something which would never happen. Pakistani psyche has always been very clear about revenge for the loss of East
71,
Pakistan.
yes.
That is a guarantee for us. That is the Machiavellian perspective, the realistic aspect of international relations. If you use Hans Morgenthau's realist approach, this is a realist option. We had these historical aspects where you put the cards together and the fit in. You see, we are bordered by a country like India which surrounds us on all four sides, including the Bay of Bengal.
Yep.
They have used the religious card to always condemn the fact that the Muslims, occupy what happened to be their Akhand Bharat.
Yep.
The Indians compel us more than any other region in the world to go for this extraordinary option. Just imagine, Finland and Sweden have turned towards NATO. It was so unusual when you look at the history that Finland has always been believing in Finlandization.
Yep.
And had decided that this appeasement cannot go on any further.
They needed NATO.
They needed NATO.
Yep.
Sweden, which is more internal, opted for NATO. One would have always thought that Sweden was an ideal example of neutralism.
Yep.
But they have opted for NATO. These are the two best examples to suggest why a country faced by a major, neutral, monstrous, demonized psyche has to be, countered by a security. And who are we looking at for security? None other than our former brothers, who have many, many good memories too to share with us. Even today, Bangladeshis feel strong passion towards Pakistan. Whenever you have a cricket match, when Pakistan is playing some other country,
They always support Pakistan.
they always support Pakistan. Imran Khan had said that when I play in Dhaka, it's almost like playing in Lahore.
Yes.
That's psychic. You can't take it away. So,
What's the role of America then? Let's just play along with this, because I'm sure
Okay.
America would have a lot to say if such a reality were to happen. Because America has a vested interest in Pakistan.
exactly.
It has its tentacles of influence, whether it's through military aid or otherwise, deep into the ISI, deep into the military establishment. Such a reality, the Americans would want to have a say. They would have a say. And that would then boil down to whether America's interest, I'm just playing devil's advocate
I know.
here. The devil's advocate would say that, hold on, okay, fine, what Professor Shahiduz Zaman is saying is wonderful, beautiful, we want it, it would be great. But the elephant in the room is that America has a lot of sway and say in the politics of Pakistan, like it does with Egypt. How do you deal with that? Do you think America could support such a pact?
I give you very strong arguments to disapprove of the idea that you hold over the United States. I look at it very differently. For America, Pakistan has always been a thorny issue. Pakistan has never been a client of the United States after Ayub Khan's demise later on. Pakistan had always been the ideal example of playing a balancer between US and China. So many times the United States had pressured Pakistan right from the beginning to disassociate itself with China.
But they never did entirely.
They never did. Pakistan had remained the most trusted ally of China, more, I think, than it did with the United States. Although the Americans consider Pakistan a non-NATO ally, Pakistan used to be in the 1960s the window to the West for China. It was through Pakistan that China normalized its relations with many of the countries of the West. The United States tried its best to dissuade, but the irony is that in 1971, when the United States was seeking détente with China, it was Henry Kissinger who flew to Beijing through Islamabad. He used a Pakistani Air Force plane to land in Beijing. And Nixon was always grateful to Pakistan for helping the United States begin the policy of détente with China. The Sino-American détente was a reward from Pakistan to the United States. It had proved without any doubt that Pakistan's close ties with China had in the long run served America's strategic survival instinct. Survival in the sense that America wanted to get out of Vietnam without a loss of face. And no other country was as important as China in order to help the United States withdraw from Vietnam. It took about 5 years for the Americans. In 1975, they finally withdrew. But without Pakistan, they would have never been able to, make a breakthrough that Henry Kissinger did.
So you're saying instead that you're actually countering by saying that you don't see Pakistan as a client state.
No.
Rather, you see it as a chief negotiator between China and America.
I'll give you a few more reasons why. Over the years, after the Cold War, as the Indians had failed to maintain the Indo-Soviet treaty with Russia, the Indians increasingly turned towards the United States. And Americans recognized India as a bastion of what they call a democracy, which could be used as a bulwark against China. Over the last 10 years or so, the Americans have signed many important defense deals with India. So much so that although India is not a part of the AUKUS, it's a part of the other agreement in the Indian Ocean. Although it didn't sign a military treaty with the United States, but it has secret bilateral military arrangements because of which the Indians have been given the technology to build 2 nuclear submarines in Visakhapatnam, which would be ready within about 15 to 20 years' time. But this reflects that the United States, which had only helped Australia with nuclear subs, has chosen to help India. What I'm trying to imply is that the United States feel absolutely committed to India as a bulwark against the Chinese in the Indian Ocean, to stop the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean before it reaches the Straits of Malacca, to use India as a military factor for the sovereignty of Taiwan. So to the United States, it's not Pakistan, it's India which is crucial. But Pakistan still remains a strategic ally of the United States for several reasons. Pakistan has the finest intelligence network, the ISI, which looks after Afghanistan. The Americans have no option but to look into Afghanistan through Pakistan's eyes. The restraint on Afghanistan to ensure that the Taliban doesn't spread radicalism worldwide. For the Americans, they rest a lot on Pakistan to provide the intelligence so that the Taliban perception of spreading Islam across the world in militant manner is contained. And China has come in a big way in Afghanistan. China is contributing immensely, and within 5 years, we might see a very different Afghanistan.
I've just gone back from Afghanistan recently.
You have.
They are developing at a pace which is truly impressive, and that's with $9.6 billion frozen. That's with no official recognition by any country. China is investing, and Afghanistan under the Taliban administration is moving at a very surprising pace.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to add here that what I was trying to say, the very idea that Pakistan is a bootlicker of the United States is absolutely not true. Rather, the United States requires Pakistan more in terms of its nuisance value, rather than as an ally of democratic values and all the goodies that we talk about between Indo-US relations.
Yeah.
Pakistan is essential for the United States as a non-NATO ally in order to, maintain a communication with China. Whenever the Americans have critical problems, Pakistan deals with it.
Yep.
Whenever Americans have an issue with Afghanistan's future, it's the Pakistanis which convince the Americans that, hey, stay away. They are developing, and give them the time, they will become a respectable member of the Committee of Nations. Now, Pakistan is a country that the Americans have to learn from. Pakistan knows the art of espionage and dealing with a country like China. So my thesis is that when we develop our nuclear ties with Pakistan, the Indians will play the role of a devil's advocate to use the United States to stop it. The Indians will use whatever means they can to make sure that we don't get those financial, loans from the World Bank. We get threatened. The Indians will try all sorts of dirty tricks. But we have seen the Indian psyche over the years. We have learned how to deal with it. And I still believe that Professor Yunus is a stubborn person. He may be very close to the United States, but he is a stubborn man who would not like to see any more of Indian military power within Bangladesh. I am now involved in an effort to try and find out ways and means so that this government is convinced that our idea of having a nuclear cooperation is not something provocative. It's not at all futuristic.
I think everyone agrees with your views. They're all cheering. They're cheering.
I couldn't believe myself that I have done it in the TSC, Teacher Student Center of Dhaka University, which has been the bastion of Indian power and influence, Indian values.
Yes.
Akhand Bharat. Now the Dhaka University has turned around.
They were cheering you.
Yes.
They clapped a huge round of applause.
This is absolutely amazing, and I pray to Almighty Allah that our student generation will recognize the importance of necessity of strategic cooperation with Pakistan. The other evening I was speaking to, Aisha Ghazi. She's a splendid person.
Top sister.
And she totally, felt convinced how badly the Pakistani psyche feels hurt when it comes to Bangladesh. The repentance is overwhelming. The educated people, the new generation, the younger generation, they feel attached to us. They look at us like their own brothers. Absolutely.
And I don't think it's fair as well on the part of the Bangladeshis to perpetually make them feel guilty of this. Right?
This has been done by the Indians. The Indians they have very sophisticated propaganda. They have persuaded a part of the Bangladeshi population, namely the Awami Leaguers.
Yes.
These Awami Leaguers still believe in secularism. I would like to say this to you, but something that I failed to mention in the TSC because I didn't have the time, that Bangladesh cannot afford to have anything to do with secularist values. We are a Muslim country. When you subscribe to secularism, then you are rejecting the two-nation theory. That means that indirectly you contribute to the idea of Akhand Bharat.
You're aiding India and its hegemonic agenda.
Exactly. We believe fully in the two-nation theory. In the near future and in the long-term future, we shall work very hard on building our faith on the two-nation theory. And that will happen as soon as we, inshallah, develop our nuclear weapons cooperation with Pakistan. As you know, the army chief, as I've been told,
Yes.
is visiting Pakistan sometime this month.
Yep.
And I would fondly hope and pray that he would broach the idea that Pakistan, what we are suffering is that there is still the Awami League mentality of people in the bureaucracy not opening up for closer ties with Pakistan. I've been told by a Pakistani diplomat that while they have opened the doors to Pakistan,
We've not opened ours.
we haven't opened I was shocked to hear that it has been 2 months and still a Pakistani visa applicant would require 3 to 6 months, would require intelligence clearance here to be given a visa. But on the other hand, we need Pakistan badly for economic ties. Pakistan is willing to offer us massive, export of cotton. If India has been conspiring to deny us cotton so that our garments industry cannot flourish. But there is the other alternative, which is Pakistan. And I've been told by a Pakistani diplomat, you don't have to worry about cotton. All you have to do is open the doors for us so that our businessmen can go and work with you, so we can restore trust, and so that, even the Pakistanis have even build up industries in Dhaka instead of Pakistan because of the stability factor. They would like to do that again. They would like to do it more. And the most important part of all this is that this will help us to develop even more trustworthy ties with China. Pakistan is also our gateway for trustful relationship to China.
Do you want to make a real difference for Palestine? Here's your chance. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? What is your Islam worth if you remain silent in the face of a genocide? Every bombing in Palestine tests your faith. As Muslims, it's our duty to stand against oppression. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ said, whoever among you sees evil, let him change it with his hand. If he's unable to do so, then let his tongue speak against it. And the lowest form of Iman is to hate it from within. Right now, our brothers and sisters in Palestine are suffering terrible persecution. 120,000 people have been martyred, 70% of whom are women and children. But what have you done about it? Help make a real change by supporting both aid and advocacy for Palestine. Apart from delivering aid, Human Aid has been advocating for the rights of Palestinians since 2010. Help support Human Aid and advocacy to support real change. But China's all about the kind of perception that is pushed by the critics of China is that whilst China is not interventionist, whilst it's not in its track record to invade Muslim countries and wage ideological wars like the war on terror and stuff like this, it is in the business of getting countries into debt. It will offer its money, it will offer its resources for return that you will forever be in their pocket. So are we going from one player? I'm just throwing counters at you.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so are we going from one pocket to another pocket? How can we prevent ourselves from becoming a vessel of India to now a vessel of China via Pakistan?
Oh, that will never happen. I'll tell you one thing. Yes, I agree with you that China has always looked after business interests. It's always looked for profits. It's been charged for being, very tough on debt repayment. All of these are also greatly Indian and Western propaganda. My own knowledge of China is that Pakistan has benefited immensely from China in terms of development. Look at the Gwadar project, the highway that comes all the way from the north that goes south. Pakistan has discovered oil and gas, 4th largest reserves in the world. If Pakistan can extract those resources from the Gwalior sea coast, it will have huge amounts of foreign exchange and it would be just as affluent. And China will help Pakistan to do it. China can be changed. The Chinese leadership is not, what you call rigid. They have been realistic. Look at the way China has changed since Deng Xiaoping. Mao, Deng Xiaoping, and we come to the present stage where China is so powerful a global player. China is pragmatic. Our problem with China had been that we have been on India's lap for all these years. We had betrayed China on the question of Tista project. We need China so badly in the north, not only for urbanization of the North Bengal, but also for military deployments and cooperation in case India plans to expand towards our northern territory. In order to prevent any Indian adventurism, we need not only Pakistani nuclear protection, but also Chinese presence. With the Chinese on Tista, we can resolve the Tista water problem. The people in the North Bengal had been suffering incessantly, and which country is more experienced to train rivers, to store it, build storage dams than China. China had been ready since 2016, but Hasina has been betraying. That is the real reason why China had turned its face away. The other reason is China had invested too much on Myanmar. But the reality now is Myanmar is breaking up. And if Myanmar is unstable, if it breaks up into so many, groups, nations, in that case, China has to have a steady southern access to the Bay of Bengal. And Bangladesh, if it has a steady relationship, statehood in the future years, if we invite China to guard, to help protect our coastal areas, if we make China, step into our swatch of no ground, which is a depth that when even the Himalayas would go inside. It is only next to the Marianas depth, and it is around 2,000 square miles. If we let the Chinese submarines ply in that depth and monitor the South Indian coast of Visakhapatnam and the city of Chennai, then China would have great strategic benefits in maintaining its presence in the Bay of Bengal. And while doing that, China will be so indebted to us that we could then ply our ships and submarines freely in the Bay of Bengal without the Indians, restraining and stopping us. So by letting China become a strategic partner in the north and also in the south on the Bay of Bengal, we will create shivers in the Indian military establishment. We have seen how over the months Indian generals have been treating Bangladesh so shabbily, so desperately. General Sharma, General Bakshi, I watch them often in the YouTube. They've been treating Bangladesh as a piece of dirt. Imagine how Jaishankar has the guts to say that Bangladesh should not have been created.
It should have been annexed.
Should have been annexed. He said it at a time when India was enjoying the closest ties with Hasina's government. He didn't hesitate. So they had looked down on us so badly. When we were having the negotiations for maritime boundaries, India directly helped Myanmar. It gifted Myanmar a submarine in order to counter the fact that we acquired 2 submarines from China. It even provided an international lawyer, an Indian international lawyer, to fight the case for Myanmar. It did everything in the world to protect Myanmar. So India is an enemy state. India will never treat us with respect as long as we flirt with her, we depend on her. But the moment we turn towards Pakistan, the moment we install nuclear weapons in Bangladesh, you will see that the Indian attitude will change dramatically. They will treat us as equals. Because basically the Indians are cowards. They know that the Northeast does not belong to them. In the last 50 years, the Northeast has always felt separate. The Chinese have interests in the Northeast. The Chinese want to annex Arunachal Pradesh. They call it Southern Tibet. And I personally believe that we should call it Southern Tibet too. Why should we call it Arunachal? The Indians don't call the Rohingyas as Rohingyas.
They call them Bengalis.
They call them Muslim.
They are Bengali Muslim.
If they can be so arrogant, we will do the same. We will say that Arunachal is Southern Tibet. The Chinese will be delighted. They would really treat us like a genuine ally. And when we think of Assam and the Northeast and the need for, gradually transferring, even we could think of annexing Arakan. Once we have a nuclear deterrent in Bangladesh, it is the Arakan army which now controls Arakan. Across the Naf River is the Arakan army. The Tatmadaw is gone. They're tied down in a cantonment in Sitwe and in some other place. Unfortunately, our military advisors who had served in Myanmar, they had always been loyal to the Tatmadaw. And they have been always preaching this idea that it's the Tatmadaw which will decide the fate of Rohingyas, which is absolutely rubbish.
No, that shouldn't be the case.
The Arakan army general wants to talk with us. The Arakan army is the only army the Arakans will live in Rakhine. Ultimately, the Rohingyas and Rakhines will have to share the land. They have to talk to each other. It just can't be that we just go on, treating the Tatmadaw as the ultimate owner of Arakan. They're not. And we are still being cheated. So what we did is we warned the Arakan army that you take back the Rohingyas, you protect them, you give them citizenship, and you make sure that the Rohingyas get back their rights as citizens, and we are never ever confronted with my exodus. And we warned them, we are in a position where our army is far better, and once we inshallah have a nuclear treaty with Pakistan, we can bluntly tell the Arakan army, you better take your Rohingyas and you treat them, or otherwise we'll take over Arakan.
Bringing our conversation to an end, how do we convey these ideas and propositions to future leaders of Bangladesh? I mean, there's one thing having these conversations optimistically, idealistically, but what matters is that it's received by those who shape our policy. Do you have any ideas or aspirations, or is there any way in which we can get this conveyed to the future Bangladeshi leadership, political or military or otherwise?
It is already being done, my friend. It is being done. The military leadership is aware of these ideas, and pretty soon we'll be having a conversation. I've already communicated with one of the advisors and with a very close, trustworthy aide of the chief advisor, Mr. Hussain Zillur Rahman, who is my batchmate and a very close friend since his Sargoda days and Cadet College days. We're very close, and I am already in touch with my former colleague, who is a very important advisor. I've conveyed my ideas and I've asked for a meeting. I've asked for a briefing, an opportunity to brief the chief advisor. And I'm hoping, inshallah, that pretty soon, if he is open to ideas, security is an area which, creates panic among economists. Even in the United States.
Because economists need stability, right?
No, the economists believe that why do you have to spend so much money on nuclear weapons?
Okay.
Why can you think of planes, warplanes? Let us invest it on hospitals. Let's invest it on building schools. Fine, those are all very noble ideas. In the United States, we've always had very bad relations between the security people and the development economists. They never seem to trust each other. Anyway, I'm sure there are people in Bangladesh among the economists who realize and recognize the Indian threat. So I don't think Professor Yunus and the group of economic advisors that he has around him, they're all very prominent, and they're doing an excellent job to repay the debts and also to retrieve the money that has been stolen. They have been, as I have heard from reliable sources, that they have done excellent work to gain the support of the Western world to retrieve the money. And the Indians feel rather nervous about it. So I am sure that hopefully in the future, this idea of closer ties with Pakistan will be received, because the Pakistani leadership has been very positive towards it. I have been told that the Pakistani military top brass has looked at this idea with tremendous degree of support. It will enhance Pakistan's prestige. It will reduce Pakistan's perception of using the nuclear radar all the way from Pakistan to Visakhapatnam. Imagine installing nukes in Bangladesh would give...
Why at the doorstep of India? There's no need. The distance issue is sorted.
Absolutely. So it will really enhance Pakistan's prestige. The most important thing is that...
Will it enhance our prestige?
Our prestige will be enhanced, surely, because we can operate our foreign policy with confidence and independence. Look at Europe. Most European countries have to fall back still on the United States.
Yep.
For their foreign policy.
In some way or another, they have to.
They have to. They haven't given up the right of first use option even today. They insist on preserving the right of first use. That is, we'll face nuclear weapon. We'll use nukes against the Russians if they invade us.
Yeah.
So we need a backbone of security pillar. And for us, a security pillar that can give meaning to our foreign policy autonomy is this nuclear deal with Pakistan. As long as you have this security insurance to fall back, then our foreign policy planners can talk across the table to the Indians more bluntly, more openly.
And with strength.
With strength. Even Pakistan will give us the real ideas on how to balance the US and China, because they have years of experience. They have the connections with both American security people and the Chinese security people. The Pakistani diplomats are superb in terms of their interaction and building the rationale for diplomacy. That is something that we have to acquire from the Pakistan. And once we develop a relationship of trust, when there is more passage, when people travel to and fro, when the airfares are made reasonable, then you will have thousands of Bangladeshis, going to tourist venues in the northwest frontier, occupying their hotels, contributing to the economy. Calcutta economy is starving because Bangladeshis are not going. The entire hotel business is collapsing. I have told the Pakistani diplomats that let's replace those travelers now flying to Karachi and to Lahore.
Definitely. So Shahiduz Zaman, it was absolutely a pleasure. It was an honor to have you on.
I hope you benefited out of it.
I benefited so much from the get-go. I wish we could have spoken for longer, but I know you're short of time. And I hope that, and pray actually, that many of the things that we discussed, that we live to see them to come into fruition, inshallah.
I hope so, because I have come across so many in my Twitter and Facebook who have absolutely felt relieved that I have come out with these options.
They have, they have indeed.
Tremendous degree of approval, both from the older and the younger generation.
It's good, inshallah.
Which is good.
Brothers, sisters and friends, I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion as much as I did. Do remember that you can find this episode and all 3 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky. Do remember to click subscribe. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.